Yes, it's another Old Mutual Wealth coffee chat with, again, my learned colleague, Tiaan Herselman, head of Old Mutual Wealth Advice and Proposition, where in the time that it takes you to make your favorite cup of coffee, we're going to disseminate some bite-sized, practical investment information that matters. Now, Tiaan, I'm going to bring you in a little later here, but you've done a lot of work on road shows talking around the huge generational wealth transfer. From a global perspective, it's worth trillions of dollars, but if we bring it back to the local context, it's even more pertinent because over a third of high net worth individuals are above the age of 60. Now, there are some pitfalls around the generational wealth transfer. As they say, it takes a generation to make it, a generation to grow it, and a generation to blow it. And obviously, financial planners and their clients don't want that to happen. But there are some pitfalls that you've discovered with our fiduciary services around the generational wealth transfer, particularly in the estate planning sphere. Expand on that.
Thanks, Dave. It's great being back for another coffee chat. Now, one of the great things at Old Mutual Wealth is that we have private clients within the Old Mutual Wealth offering, which looks at high net worth clients with bespoke needs. And a core part of this offering is the fiduciary offering by private clients. Now, one of the questions we get a lot when looking at estate planning, which is such an important component of a financial plan, is what happens if I have foreign assets? Do I actually need a foreign will? And the answer is, in most cases, your South African will can deal with most of your global assets. However, there are some certain circumstances, like when you have property offshore, or if you have ownership in certain companies offshore, where you probably do want to have a foreign will to deal with these circumstances. But where you have unit trusts or ETFs or even foreign life cover, your SA will should be able to deal with these. But if you look at some of the pitfalls we see a lot when doing estate planning for clients, the first one that comes to mind is we often see clients leaving assets to their kids, maybe a property that I bequeath in my will, and we don't take into account the marital regime. So let's say I'm married in community or property, or married with the accrual system. I leave my property to my son, not knowing that upon my passing, my surviving spouse still owns a portion of that property. And that leaves now the surviving spouse and my child in a difficult predicament, because now they have co-ownership. Who inhabits the place? Does the one sell their portion? And these open up quite a few difficulties or hard conversations to have. The third one we're seeing a lot with people becoming global citizens and investing outside of the borders of South Africa is the impact of holding certain securities, not just in SA, but in places like the US. Because to keep it very short, there are some jurisdictions where you don't just pay a state duty of 20 or 25% in South Africa. You can also pay something called CITES tax, which is 40%. Now in the US, if I own any shares directly that aren't wrapped or in a particular investment structure, I could be charged 40% on amounts of more than $60,000. And that's something we see quite often where people have these direct offshore share portfolios, but they aren't aware of the estate planning implications. Furthermore, one big thing, we're seeing more and more beneficiaries becoming global citizens. So the kids of our clients residing offshore, and they actually aren't South African tax residents anymore. The issue with that is that certain jurisdictions, and again, I'll look at America, they actually don't recognize a lot of the investment structures in our country, which means that you might have, let's say, a life-wrapped investment, you leave that to a beneficiary, but when they inherit the investment, it may be fully income taxable in the US, as an example. So it's very important to look at your investment structures if your beneficiaries no longer are SA tax residents and they don't stay in SA. Then the other thing we see often is a lot of people upon their passing leave their assets or they bequeath it to a trust. Now, the issue in doing that is you need to make sure that your trust deed still reflects all the beneficiaries it needs to protect. So as an example, if I leave some assets to a trust and I only have 2 of the 5 kids on the trust deed, that could obviously cause some implications, because now the trust deed upon my passing doesn't reflect the wishes that might be in my will. And then a thing we see a lot is a lot of people love leaving some form of a cash legacy. I want to leave money to the SPCA or maybe an older school, or I want to leave some money to one of my grandkids. But they fail to realize that there actually has to be cash for that. And they might think, well, I've got some life cover, or I've got some retirement funds, or I maybe have this endowment policy. But all of those policies have beneficiary nominations, and they pay out outside of the estate. So in many cases, we come together, we sit with the beneficiaries, and there is no cash to fund that. Another pitfall we see, and this is probably the biggest one we see, is clients not knowing the difference between estate liquidity and estate solvency. Estate solvency means I have more assets than I have liabilities in my estate. An example of this is if I have a property and the property is worth 20 million rand. I owe nothing on the property, so my estate is technically solvent. There's more assets than there are liabilities. But do I have the liquidity to pay for the estate duty? Maybe it's going to my kids, the executors' fees, the capital gains tax, some transfer costs. And if I don't have that estate liquidity, my estate, it may be solvent, but it's not liquid. And in that scenario, you might see the beneficiaries, the kids, and we've seen this happen, unfortunately, not inherit the property. They have to sell the property because they can't afford the associated estate cost that comes with that property because their estate is not liquid. And then something we almost can't talk enough about is having a pop-off file. Having one place where you have all your important documents such as your ID, your marriage license, your TV license, all your firearm licenses, all these things that tend to hold up an estate and that actually prevents the executive from winding up the estate in a timely manner. Make sure you have that document or even electronically stored and somebody has access to that information, even your passwords for your accounts, these kind of things, your logging to your profiles that somebody can easily access when you pass away. And these are just some of the estate planning pitfalls we see with high net worth clients when we look at their estate planning. And we've always believed that estate planning is such an important part of your financial plan. And that is why we at Old Mutual Wealth, through our fiduciary offering at private clients, pay a lot of attention to this particular element of financial planning.
Yeah, so interesting. A lot of detail in that, Tiaan. And I guess the old adage goes to show that if you don't plan properly for your wealth, the government will. What are the practical steps, high level, that financial planners can do now in order to circumvent those pitfalls?
I think if any of these estate planning pitfalls rings sense to you as a client or maybe to one of your clients as a financial advisor, reach out to any of your mutual wealth representatives and perhaps there is potential for us to bring in a fiduciary specialist to look at your client's estate planning and to make sure that none of these pitfalls are applicable to them. We're looking at their overall financial plan and the transfer of wealth in their financial plan.
Thanks, Tiaan. As usual, very insightful and practical tips to financial planners. Join us again for another Old Mutual Wealth Debrief Exchange.